like to quickly introduce Amir from Dell. I think Dell needs no introduction to anyone in the room. Everyone has something or the other from Dell, either servers or laptops. So it's a pretty, pretty household name all across the globe. So we'll basically cut to the chase and dive into the crux of the situation almost instantaneously. Big question: the infrastructure that powers all of the AI and the data platforms today. What do you think the enterprise still underestimates after all the innovation that we've seen in the last 3 quarters?
Yeah, great question. And my response really is based on the strategy that we have at Dell Technologies. The way that we have been seeing and visualizing AI since the hype started about 7, 8 years ago. And even prior to that, Dell Technologies had been involved in delivering AI-related infrastructure and solutions in some shape and form. But we have come a long way because we have learned a lot from our customers. Customers are our biggest teachers. And what we have learned from them is that moving forward, or for a little while it's been like that they don't come to us as an AI to add another feature to their production. They actually come to us to help them out to put together an operations, a productionizing fabric, and moving forward. So it has been taken over the ideology and the thinking of how the production environment looks like, rather than having, multiple clusters of the servers and all that, and some application servers or this and that and that. Now, AI is all of a sudden is an operations fabric. And but AI is not like everything else, as we all know. If it were like many years ago, then I would have provided a different lecture. But now we all know that AI minus data is equal to nothing. It's not doing anything. So let's get back to the data. So our focus, in order to make AI, in order to make our customers AI successful, is going to step back and be thinking about the magic word of data. And this is why we have great companies such as Acceldata, such as VAST, and everybody else who've been thinking along the same track of thinking, that how can we provide an autonomous data platform so that it would actually help the customers to start with their own data sources and bring them in, unify them, and make them something that AI likes. AI likes rows and columns. I mean, genetically, although for example, implementing certain algorithms such as unsupervised learning, and all this kind of thing, we may not necessarily have all exactly, the spreadsheets or maybe rows and columns and all that. But in most of the cases, when we do supervised learning based and all that, we need rows and columns. But the data doesn't come like that. So we had to come with a strategy. How would a data platform look like? So the data comes in, is PDF. It's probably retrieved from some RDBMS. It's probably retrieved. It's multimodal. Maybe it's an audio that changed, to text. Maybe text itself. Maybe video. Maybe image. But collectively, they have to come to some kind of tabular way. And so we needed a strategy to tabularize this mishmash, if we want to call it. But on top of that, then all of a sudden we faced the agentic AI. All of a sudden, for in the past many years, and the agentic data, although they are a piece of software, but they really started with accessing models. and defining models to access and all that. But when we really think about putting together a prompt context, prior to submitting it to those models, we still need a very well-defined data platform. And for this data platform, then again, we need to impose exactly the observability and the auditability that characteristics that great products such as Acceldata, they also have that embedded into their native architecture, and all that, so that it would treat agents also like human beings, like first-class identities. I mean, impose security on them, impose, minimal privileges, and all that. So we thought of something that we call AIDP, Artificial Intelligence Data Platform, and it probably has some overlaps with your Acceldata and VAST, and all that. But ultimately, what we want to do is to submit AI-ready data to the AI compute and storage infrastructure, which is most likely tabular. And in order to tabularize that, we need to leverage open source products. First of all, we need to define some kind of file format. So we look at, underneath, we look at Parquet, we look at Avro, and all that, and then how we can grab these and create a tabular or a columnar tables. So we leverage products, like Iceberg, maybe, or Delta Lake from Databricks. But ultimately, we would be submitting to the training process on top of the infrastructure a table. So this constituted our strategy for envisioning a data platform, very similar to your Acceldata, and I heard today about VAST, and all that. We have the same envision, some overlap, some don't, but ultimately we would be supporting our customers to helping them out to get their raw data, if I want to, and then but make it AI ready, which would mean 99% of maybe a tabular form, or
That's very, very interesting, Amir.
Yeah.
So talking about AI readiness and agentic readiness, I think one of the core things that any of the platforms basically need is the compute.
Yes.
The horsepower, which basically comes from the infrastructure, whether CPU or GPU. From a Dell's perspective, what is Dell doing for the future? If you can share something about how we can envision a future where, there is better compute availability or better GPU availability for the on-prem or hybrid user.
Yeah. So overall, the short answer is we also strategize scaling a GPU-based infrastructure. And our partner, NVIDIA, of course, and AMD and Intel complement our servers. I'm not trying to sell you Dell servers or anything like that, please. But since the word compute came in order for everything that we just talked about, processing the data and manipulating the data to be successful, we definitely need to have an infrastructure, and the infrastructure that, now, where is the infrastructure located? I heard from John that it's the compute that now moves and not the data. Very, very well defined. Our strategy is as follows. We obviously advocate on-prem and colo, together for example, training, for sure, training the models, and inferencing for most of the times. And for inferencing, we leverage our partner software stacks, such as NVIDIA AI Enterprise, and for example, AMD ROCm and Intel One API, and all that. But the whole idea is that we encourage that this would all be done on-prem. Now, let's say there are agents, there is agentic AI domains that they need to be closer to the device. They need to be closer to the desktop, where basically these agents have been built and all that. Then, of course, our next offering options would be edge. edge. And we consider cloud for burst and for R&D and also for hosting non-mission critical services that there would be any worrisome about the privacy of the data or the security of the data, to expose those services as the collection of the ecosystem that the agents not only leverage the model themselves, but also leverage those services in the cloud. So this basically spans from on-prem all the way to cloud, depending on what data where is applied, to what stack.
Very, very well put. So with that regard, since you touched upon sovereignty, privacy, and also in the same length, hybrid, which gives users the flexibility to port between technologies and ecosystems as they kind of ramp up on their agentic journey. So what do you foresee from, or what's Dell's strategy from the perspective where a customer who has been either a cloud native user or someone who's always stayed on-prem, but now wants to take advantage of both sovereignty and hybrid flexibility at the same time? So what's Dell's strategy, or what's Dell's vision with regards to enabling something like that?
Yes, the magic word is hybrid. And we sell servers. Yes, we are the provider of the servers, and we advocate on-prem and all that. But when we talk to our customers, the very first thing that we tell them, just to put their mind at ease, is that your best bet would be start thinking in a hybrid domain, in a paradigm. And if we go that way, that we would actually distribute the compute, distribute the storage, and when it's necessary on-prem and when it makes sense on cloud, we're definitely now establishing a hybrid. Now, as far as securing the data, as far as that all follows not our necessarily standards, but the community standards, the open source, whatever that is available. And we follow that and we recommend that to the customer. But we never push for on-prem per se or something like that. We're not really competing, against cloud. We are partnering, with cloud. Put your compute, your storage, and all that, and everything in cloud wherever it makes sense. And I talk to a lot of customers, and the very first question that I ask them is this. I used to work for Walmart Labs, and the retailers are extremely strict about their customers' data and all that. They would not even put a byte, outside of their infrastructure. So I would ask them, immediately, that how critical is your data? Can it be in somebody else's premise, like what, like cloud, like a public cloud, even though it's all secure and it's on the surface and all that. So I always start with something like that, and if I see opportunities where cloud applies, it makes sense. Of course, that's we definitely recommend hybrid. Hybrid. This is why we say that it spans, from on-prem all the way to cloud.
Right, but if you had to pick a winning horse, placing a bet. Is there a parameter that you advise your customers towards, like, basis of scale or locality or, I don't know, type of workload, that on-prem versus cloud, which is a better option?
Yes. So again, the main parameter is their data privacy. The very first question that I ask them, okay, you're going to be inferencing, you're going to be receiving prompts, you're going to be receiving queries, you're going to be receiving data. Is that, yes, it is apparently secure, and all that. But is this something that you are okay with to, for example, expose in cloud? Yes, no. That's pretty binary thinking. Say, no. If you talk about the retailers, say, no way. We don't. So that is really our data privacy. And if it's an IP, for example, for retailers, the customer's names and their credit cards and their history of their shopping, it's IP. It's really, this is what they make the most of the revenue on besides selling items in the store, and all that. So yeah, that is definitely the main parameter in my opinion. If everything 100% is can be exposed and nothing and all that, cloud definitely is a solution,
Awesome.
but cloud native also has its own merits. Obviously,
Absolutely.
it gives you that data privacy, it gives you the control, it gives you the scalability, admin, privacy, the elasticity is under your own control, and all that, rather than going to, for example, buy a policy that AWS provides or Azure provides or others, something like that. I personally think that how IP is the data. If it's for retailers, no cloud, period. However, cloud cannot be totally ignored, obviously. Again, there are services that can be exposed and they can provide responses, and all that on data that is not necessarily mission critical.
Well put. So probably a last question before we kind of open it to audience to ask you any questions that they would want to. And I know that, Dell World is also happening this week. Any new innovations, announcements in the space of enterprise and, AI or, horsepowers that Dell is bringing to the
So there is a lot, and it's all available. It's all public and all that. But from my own work, I can tell you that, that I have I share my own experience. Everybody looks at his own interest. I have a GB10, which is equivalent of the Dell Pro Max GB10, and it has a GPU, and it was announced that there is a GB100 now, and it is liquid cooled. You basically should not go by the size anymore. That size really doesn't matter. My box is about this little, but the Girl Scouts cookie, maybe size and all that. Maybe GB100 is a little bit bigger than that, but even that little thing is liquid cooled. Now you can go way more compute capacity, and do a lot more things, than I'm doing with my own GB10 on my desk at home. I have not really digged into the GB100 yet. I don't want to say something publicly, that it would misrepresent it. But from a data scientist point of view, myself, it was probably the best gift that we actually offered with the collaboration of NVIDIA Spark.
Awesome.
Spark 100, if you want to call it.
So it's like supercomputer 2.0 this year?
Most likely, yes. Absolutely, yes.
Great. So with that, I think just quickly going to open it up for any Q&A. If anyone has any questions for Dell or Dell's perspective from Amir.
Yeah, so in terms of managing your thank you, your data platforms, what's the most critical aspect for your sort of internal IT systems that you need in order to continue to accelerate, the physical supply chain at Dell? What are the things that you care most about in terms of the quality of the data, observability that you just described?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So all that given customer data, storage, data lake, S3, all that, converting everything from raw to, for example, AI-ready data, and all this. But nothing would be perfect without having data processing engines. Nothing would be perfect without having massively parallel processing engines and a search engine, obviously, and nothing more important on top of that, an engine that would orchestrate all of that. So I did not get to talk to about these things. But on top of all this, what really complements to your question is a layer that it actually provides multi-purpose engines such as Spark, such as our partner Starburst massive MPP engine, or Elasticsearch for post-processing and retrieval prior to creating the context for the agentic AI and all that. But we recently we had all these engines, but we were not able to orchestrate them. So we acquired a company named Data Loop that it sits on top of all that, and it actually provides the ultimate context off of the outcome of the Elasticsearch that is retrieval from this either massively parallel through Starburst or through Spark engine data processing. That's probably the complement. Oh, we hit 0. right on.
We might take one more question, or sure, please.
Amir, thank you for your insight. I'm very curious, right? As you got embarked into the AI journey, how did you delineate the differentiation of work between traditional data workloads, which is analytics and reporting driven, versus workloads that are AI driven?
So traditional workloads versus generative, for example?
Versus AI workloads, whether generative AI or agentic AI workloads. So how did what different angle you took in the
non AI workloads versus AI workloads. We like I said, our biggest teachers are our customers, and we learn from our customers precisely how to go through this journey of emerging from non-AI workloads towards the AI workloads. We also evolve, just like our customers, in parallel. We also evolve our infrastructure. We also evolve our storage. We also evolve our data platform. And we also learn more and more about how to articulate better AI-ready data. And I think our main focus, finally, at the end of the day, is how to leverage AI off of either AI-driven applications or non-traditional, for example, driven applications, but how to leverage the best of the AI, either through training, maybe better, or maybe inferencing better. But we also evolve. There are also questions that I will never be able to answer to you right now, but maybe 2 years from now, if you ask me, I would have an answer for that. But we are also evolving exactly at the same time.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
So, last question, and then we'll wrap.
Less than 10 seconds. With the whole GPU evolving, right? What's the current footprint of percentage between CPUs and GPUs? 2 years down the line, how do you see this evolving as well because AI is an important journey that we're going through. Do you see a shift in the percentage of split between CPUs, GPUs, or it's probably going to remain the same?
Depends on the workload. Really depends on the workload. I honestly, when I talk to my customers, one of the things that I do is to make sure that this conversation is a GPU bound. Maybe there is something that she is not considering. Maybe it would be all with CPU. So there is no linear y is equal to mx plus b thing that I can draw some point here and tell you. Yeah. It all depends on the use case, on the data, on the data gravity, on the data volume, the complexity. Now, is there opportunity for prediction, for predictive analytics? If there is opportunity for predictive analytics that would create an enhancement into the ROI, yes, of course. If not, I have told many customers myself, look, you don't need a GPU. So we have to put them into 2 different jars, and say, okay, the world will be divided by problems that demand a GPU, or they would be waiting for a response 3 days, something like that, or they can get away with the cores that are available on AMD CPU and on our Intel CPU and all that. They just have to do a little bit of parallelizing and maybe multi-threading, really like write good multi-thread programs, and you would get away with that, and you would be near real time. Something like that. So really, there is no line that it is definitely a shape up like this, done like this, like this, of course. But demand for GPU is going high. Honestly, some of it is hype. Some of it, is that, okay, we need a GPU. So why do you need a GPU? Something like that. You need to first convince yourself that you actually are leveraging your tensor cores. You're leveraging your, for example, GPU RAM. Are you using a foundation model? How many are you going to distribute it? Put them all, stick them all into one GPU, or you want to distribute it amongst more GPU? Oh, now you need more than one GPU. Something like that. Versus, for example, some predictive analytics on home prices in some zip code, or something like that, with 5,000 or 10,000 rows and maybe 50 features, something like that, that they can get away with a linear regression or a logistic regression with RAIN or something. That you don't need a GPU. You can do it on your laptop. Yes. Yes, of course. But if anything, bound to generative meaning, if we put the data and when we can get a label, you need to think twice. Do I need a GPU or not? If it's only a label, for example, 10,000 pictures of cats and dogs, the next one that you haven't seen, is it cat or dog? Is it DOG or CAT? You probably need to think. However, if you are putting a text, that would be, write me a PhD thesis, on, for example, how to land, safely on Mars, something like that, then you are dealing with 200 billion parameters, maybe now tera, probably number of parameters. So there, yes, you can also do that with CPU, but you have to wait 10 years in order to get together a response. So GPU would definitely do the shortcut, and then it would quickly respond. And so it all depends on the knowledge and the education of the customer as well. How close are they to the reality of accelerators? When is an accelerator required, and when you can get away without an accelerator? And there is no y is equal to mx plus b. There is no linear equation.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Sure.
Appreciate it.